You're listening to the Around the Lens podcast, the home of high-quality, roundtable, visual journalism discussion about the news, topics, and gear related to our career field. Now, here's the host of our show, David J. Murphy.
Hello and welcome to Around the Lens episode 246. I'm your host, freelance visual journalist based out of South Korea, David J. Murphy. Joining me this week are two awesome guests. We'll start with our returning guest, Mr. Josh Edelson, freelance photographer based out of San Francisco. Hello, Josh. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Glad to have you back on. This is your second appearance. How have you been since the last time you were on?
Good. More fires, more craziness. Basically 2020 is everything I've experienced before on steroids, so to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you cover the fires, that's kind of like your big thing, and, you've lived in that world for a long time. Has it been any different, in terms of the intensity of the fires, or is it pretty much just same old fires?
No, definitely more intense. It seems like every year, all the rules, the things we can expect in terms of fire behavior and fire activity, those rules tend to get broken, and new standards and new levels seem to be reached.
Nice. Wow. Jeez.
Yeah, it's every year it seems to get crazier, and this year was no exception.
Was it crazy with all the red skies and everything?
You know what's interesting is when San Francisco had those red skies, as I'm sure many people saw online, I actually missed that because I was at the fire.
Oh,
so
yeah,
there's never, ironically, there's never been a time where I felt like I missed a section of the story because I was actually at the center of where the story was originating. Right. That was very bizarre.
Indeed. Yeah, I saw the video and the photos. It was like, I love the San Francisco, what was it? They made it look like a movie, with the drone footage and stuff like that. Blade Runner, they made it look like Blade Runner. That was pretty
Blade
great.
Runner that was really cool.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk more about that later. Our other guest, a longtime friend of mine. We go way back, all the way back to the Syracuse University days. Go Orange. Speaking of Orange.
Go Orange.
Yeah. Mr. Chris Stoltz, a visual artist based out of Los Angeles and former sailor. How you doing, Chris?
Very good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, glad to have you, buddy. Great to hear from you. It's been too long, and I've been keeping up with you on the Facebook, but how have things been going for you in LA? What kind of brought you to LA?
Well, we got out of I got out, talking the we when you get married, I guess.
Yeah, no, right.
I got out of the military, and we decided to move this way. My wife has some family here, so it's been a nice move out here. LA has been surprising and delightful in every single aspect. So yeah, we've really enjoyed getting out this way.
Did you?
Never thought I'd live on the West Coast, honestly.
I know, right? It'd be like East Coast for life, or whatever. Where'd you think you'd end up, if not the West Coast?
I thought I'd end up back in the South. I thought I'd end up back in North Carolina. And maybe one day we'll still, but it's been a nice change of pace out here. It's definitely. The food out here is great. You can't beat it.
Nice. Okay. Did you have any of the red skies by chance in LA? Did the fires
We had
drift that far?
a little bit of it. Yeah, we were getting a little bit, and we were getting a little bit of the ash as well.
Oh, wow.
But it was really weird. Like the sun was like covered. It was I would say very Blade Runner-y. The 2020 Blade Runner vibe was definitely kicking in here.
Indeed. Of course, it would only add to what 2020 has been and is for all of us. The year that we all survive, I think, right? Once we get to 2021, we'll talk about how we survived 2020, more so than other years, I think. But anyways, great to have you both guys on. We're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff tonight, so let's get on with the show. Our first topic is about Nikon. I wish I had Zach on because he's our resident Nikon user, but, of course, he's doing his own thing right now. So we'll get him on another time to talk. Maybe when these new cameras actually drop, we can get his take on that. But let's talk a little about the rumors that have come out. Before we talk about this, though, any Nikon shooters in the room? Chris or Josh?
I'm Nikon.
Nikon? Okay, great. You can.
I've shot Nikon for 15 years in the Navy. And I think they have a contract, so I'm a fan.
Yeah. No, I shot Nikon for much of my career as well. I've loved. I started out on Nikon. That was my first camera. My first ever film camera was Nikon. So they've got a nice place in my heart. But of course, if you've looked at what kind of camera innovations have been coming out recently, there hasn't been a lot coming out from Nikon, at least not compared to what's been dropping from Sony and Canon and others folks, as far as I consider. But they've got 2 cameras that are coming out on the 14th. That's their big announcement. So, of course, once that drop, we'll know for sure. But we have some sort of pre-release rumored speculation going on. We'll talk about that and kind of what our general impression are of these 2 cameras. So they're supposed to start shipping in November. It's the Z6 II and then the Z7 II. I guess their higher-end camera will ship in January. They should have 4K 60. It says here with a 1.7x crop factor, which is disappointing considering Sony and Canon have both been able to introduce cameras without that. Prices are looking at about $1,800 and $2,500. The Z7 actually probably fall in line with the R6 from Canon and the S5 from Panasonic. So that's interesting to see where they're kind of placing these cameras and kind of where they consider them. Looks like they're using the same sensors as the previous ones. That's interesting. Battery grips, okay. 14 frames per second for the Z6, 12 frames per second for the Z7, okay. That's not bad if the Z7 is, 40, 50 megapixels, I guess. Let's see, animal IF, low light, improved energy savings. Nothing too mind-blowing here. I kept on, seeing like rumors like 8K and other things like that, but that could come from, I hear they're working on a D5 mirrorless replacement, like the Z9 or something like that, but I haven't seen too much on that. But yeah, these seem they're aiming for the same sort of prosumer, high-level consumer market they have in the past. Nothing too exciting with regard to features. I'll pull up the A9 specs, but do either of you guys have any interest in this? These new cameras, the C6 II or the C7 II? Have either of you moved to the Z series or tried their mirrorless lenses?
I got a Z7, so I've been shooting Nikon pretty much since the start of my career, and I currently have a D5, a D4S, and now a Z7. Mm-hmm. I wasn't willing to make the full switch to mirrorless because, I don't know, I just didn't want to take that big of a leap. And the main reason I got the Z7 is because of the larger megapixels. So since I think it's like 47 megapixels or something like that. Yeah. So my thinking was that I didn't really want to spend $10,000 on a 600 millimeter 2.8 lens. Mm-hmm. So instead, I bought the Nikon 200 to 500 5.6, mm-hmm. which was I think it was I don't know, 1,200 or 1,500. And I figured with that lens at 500 on the Z7, I could probably crop in by 50%, and it would be relatively close to shooting with a 600. And that was a much less expensive way of getting in a lot tighter. And so that was my initial thought on getting the Z7 was the megapixels. But the mirrorless also offers one other thing that does help me quite a bit, and that's the silent shooting. Mm-hmm. Back when corporate events were actually happening, there were a number of times where I had to shoot very sparingly because of how loud Nikon's shutter is. Especially with the D5 and the D4S. I mean, it's just you hear that mirror slapping really loud, and sometimes I have to shoot a frame and then wait 15 seconds and then one more frame because otherwise it's really obnoxious. So having the mirrorless gives me that option, although I haven't really needed it since my corporate work has diminished quite a bit this year. But
you don't want to disturb the firefighters as they're trying to fight the roaring fire, right? You got to keep that quiet while they're doing their job.
I will say that having the Z7 on the fire line has been useful for airdrops or things where I need to crop in quite a bit. Yeah. But I do feel more comfortable with my D5 because of the low light.
Yeah.
Now, do you think the weight factor is a huge difference to you, especially when you're carrying multiple bodies, or you dig?
It does make a difference if I'm walking around a lot. I mean, especially with if I have like my 50 1.8 lens on the Z7, it's really light, and I almost would forget I even have a camera on me, as opposed to, the D5 or D4S, which are pretty heavy. However, the majority of the weight is usually on the lens. So if I have like a 135 1.4, then it's still going to feel heavy, but it does make a difference.
Yeah, I've been a long time mirrorless user. I swapped over to Leica like maybe back in 2008, 2009-ish, and I've just never looked back. I've really, I think I got used to carrying a Nikon D3 in the military and then D4 towards the back end. And then when that swap happened, I was like, this thing is so much lighter and it's so much,
What'd you swap to mirrorless? What was your first mirrorless after going from DSLR?
So I went to a Leica ME, and it's like the famous M mount, and I just noticed the 9-day, and now I shoot like a Leica SL, so we got the silent shutter, all that stuff, but and I love those cameras, but I feel like I'm excited that Nikon's finally getting, trying to get really good at the game of it, because I feel like once everyone's on that platform, it'll, innovation will start to chug along a little bit better. I think they're maybe a little late to the party on this, but I was reading something the other day that was saying that now's the time to be excited for them, because I think they were like, oh, well, this is the thing. Yeah, and they did the same thing when they swapped from film to digital as well. They were probably the last ones in. They were still making an F6, but when they should have been making a D2 a little bit better. Yeah. So, I think everything that I've seen, I have not got to shoot this camera yet, so maybe I'm not the expertise on it. But when I read those spec reviews, I'm like, these are getting there, and I like what's coming out of it.
Yeah, I think these are definitely going to be, for those people who are shooting the Z series already, this is going to be a probably compelling upgrade for them. Or if you perhaps were smart and didn't buy first generation equipment, now you're getting kind of into they figured out what to do right, what to do wrong. Maybe they have 2 card slots on there and they worked out the kinks, and now you're getting into the second generation when they actually have a little bit more maturity, which when the first ones came out, I was always telling people, hey, wait, don't get the R from Canon, don't get the Z from, because again, Sony took 3-4 iterations before they got to cameras that people, were actually very salivating for, like the A7S 3, right, and the A4 and all the things that they're doing. So, again, I would say to wait, but we'll find out if these are actually compelling upgrades. Were you gonna say something, Josh?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One other thing that in terms of the size of the Z7 or even the Z6, that I think is worth mentioning, it's especially useful to have that camera be smaller when you're wearing a mask, like at protests, if I'm wearing a gas mask, or at fires. I have it's called an HS4. It's like this big filter mechanism and then goggles on. And so I found that with my D5, sometimes I kind of there's like a space between my eye and where the actual camera is, because of it's bumping up against the filter. Whereas with the smaller camera body, I can actually get it closer to my eye. So that's worth noting. And then the other thing that's a huge thing is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth transfer on the mirrorless, which for some reason that confounds me. Nikon's DSLRs like D5, D4S, you had to buy this Wi-Fi dongle that was like $600, and it was a complete it just, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, and their smaller little point and shoot cameras had the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth transfers on them, so we knew that the technology existed, but for some reason they just wouldn't put it in their high-end DSLRs, maybe because they were trying to squeeze an extra $600 out of people, which really rubbed all of us Nikon users the wrong way, especially since Canon had it. And so that in combination with the D6 coming out prematurely and not really adding much kind of makes us feel okay, mirrorless is their last hurrah, so they better nail it.
Mm-hmm. Whenever I see things like that, I really just feel like it's more of an engineer. An engineer didn't think to put it in because they were probably given that requirement at the very last inning of the match or something. Like it's one of those things where Canon probably was like, "We got it, let's put it in," and then Nikon sees that camera come out, like, "Can we put this in?" No, but we can build a thing that goes on top.
It's nice of you to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
I don't buy it.
You don't buy it. You don't buy it. Okay.
No.
I would like to. I believe in these companies. I really do feel like they want to make a good camera. I don't think they're negligent and like, oh, we just don't want to put it in.
I don't know. I mean, Canon and Nikon did not move at all on mirrorless until Sony actually dropped, their cameras and started stealing their market share. So, do they really have the best interest of us in mind, or are they just going to go with the same old until someone challenges, their dominance and their monopolies and stuff, duopoly, I guess. But with regard to moving from DSLR to mirrorless, I always say when I moved to not only mirrorless but Micro Four Third at the Panasonic, it was such a great, like, so much weight lifted off. I don't know if you used ever Micro Four Thirds, but it was just, I mean, I know it's smaller sensor and stuff, but man, it was wonderful. Now I'm back to full frame sensor with the Canon R5, and it's like, oh man, all the weight, but it's still better than the 5D Mark II. I'll take that any day of the week in terms of from weight size and stuff like that. But I was just pulling up the specs here for the Sony A9, or I'm sorry, the Nikon Z9. These are some of the specs leaked here, and they're talking about a 46 megapixel sensor, so probably the same, if not nearly identical sensor that's going to be in the Z7, but it's going to be capable of 20 frames per second photos, 8K 30p video. They're looking at like a price range of $6,000 to $7,000 for it, so it's definitely kind of be like their D5, D6 replacement, I'm guessing, available in fall 2021. So a lot of the kind of gigabit Ethernet and some of the other things you expect on sort of a high-res, sort of high, pro quality, I guess you would say, camera. I don't know if you've seen any of the A9 or Z9 specs at all. There's really not too much to go off of here from what I can find. But again, does a flagship full body, D6 mirrorless D6 equivalent with 8K capability, does that interest you at all, Josh or Chris?
There's two considerations that could change my mind about it. Right now, no. One, how does the ISO or low light performance compare to the D5? If it's equal or better, then that makes a big difference to me. And two, right now, in order to use all my existing lenses, there's that little adapter, right? And that has caused a few problems for me in that there's a very slight delay. So when I turn the camera on, I have to wait sometimes as much as 2 seconds before it actually like clicks in, and apparently that's because of the adapter, and I've missed shots because of that.
Oh jeez, yeah.
So that is slightly frustrating. Now granted, I know that if I got all of the Z series lenses, it would eliminate that problem, but I'm not about to change my entire lens inventory just to avoid that one adapter, especially when I'm not 100% convinced on their mirrorless system yet.
Right.
So it would really have to be a significant performance improvement than the D5 in order for me to make that jump.
Yeah, I wonder, do the extreme heat and scenarios you work in like affect the mirrorless differently than the mirror camera, or does the mechanical shutter-based camera have better longevity or endurance in a fire situation, or is it no difference?
So far, not a huge difference, although I do use my D5 and D4S a lot heavier during fires, and they really handle it well. Like there are times when it's so hot I can't hold the camera without wearing gloves because it will burn my skin, and I'm shooting and that camera's getting hot. A similar situation with my iPhone, where I have a battery pack on my iPhone, and sometimes I'm taking a video and the phone just gets too hot. So I've actually had it like start to turn off because I'm too close to the fire and it's just getting really hot. But the cameras, I've never had them turn off so far. So
I did not have a similar. I think maybe I didn't have a D5, but I had a D4 in Iraq, and I remember it like shutting down on me just from the heat outside. Like you
yeah,
spend the day in the Humvee, and then you get out, and it was just like we're not working today. So I don't think there's anything more awkward than being a photographer with a camera that doesn't turn
yeah,
on. You
Yeah, right.
know?
yeah.
It's like the
They're like,
one
what are you
thing you were
doing?
here for. The one thing.
I could see that.
So
With fires, it's slightly different in that the heat radiates from like a central source as opposed to being all around. I mean, it's not usually 130 degrees on the ground. It's usually like if I'm photographing a building on fire, then like the lens is going to take the brunt of the heat just because it's a big lens.
Yeah.
So there's that.
I'd love to take my Canon R5 and shoot a fire. I'm sure there'd be no issues with overheating whatsoever. Have any of your compatriots out there, has anybody have an R5? Have they tested it out there by chance?
I have a buddy that just got an R5, but he hasn't used it enough for me to hear how it
Okay.
compares yet.
Yeah. No, it's just
Yeah.
funny with all the overheating issues with that camera. It'd probably die on the vine shooting
Uh,
a forest fire or something.
mhm.
But okay, cool. So you're using the Leicas, Chris, and you're happy with that. No chance that no chance you can
yeah,
change it right now.
I would swap. Like I would consider it if Nikon just came out with some optics that were on par. Like the main reason I was photo editing at the time, and I just saw Leica come across, and like the clarity on those were just a little bit better for me. Like just the contrast like appealed to me a little bit more. I like not only the compact size, but just like I still have like I just got I still have like Nikon DSLRs, and I chase the kids around with them every once in a while. The autofocus is great. Like my SL does autofocus, but the M's are manual, so like the kids, when I just need to grab like a small camera and run around with them, I'll take the old Nikon and shoot them with it. So I'm not completely out of the habit. And then after shooting it for so long, I'm sure y'all are familiar. You just get to know those buttons really well. So like you know how to make it move a little bit quicker. So
Oh yeah.
That's a big thing for me too. I have a really
Yeah.
hard time going from the D5 to the Z7. Like, there'll be times when I'm like, how do I change the white balance again? And I like need to take a minute and
Yeah.
That's the other thing. It's a big ask to ask like your entire setup to shift over. I think that's a big, and maybe why Nikon. Again, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to the camera company. Maybe they're just like, we like where our stuff's positioned. People can pull it up. For years. I mean, every D model had that little pad in the back. So I don't know. Is it the same on the Z? Is it the same on the Z back?
it's slightly different. I mean, there is that pad on the back, so you can navigate around. I don't know about the positions. Like, it's just not my D5. Like, the D5 seems to be like designed around the shape of my hand. And so, with the Z series, like, because they're so much smaller, they can't really do that. So it just doesn't really work that way.
That's the one thing with Sony that's never won me over is the ergonomics have just never been there for me. Whereas I feel like when you pick up a Nikon D, like it does feel like it's supposed to be in your hand. There's like a little bit of a grip to it. Like I don't know if y'all feel the same way, but for me, ergonomics is huge.
Yeah. I know that for the Z series, they're planning on adding a battery pack or something so you can shoot vertical and still have that grip, and that will help. But by far the biggest thing that's a big disappointment is the battery, at least on the Z7, and I think on the Z6 as well. Like it dies in like an hour.
Oh wow!
It's
Yeah, that's
really
short.
it's like I don't know the exact. It's like a tiny little battery that's like half the size of the D. Like I shot something with the Z7 and the D5 once, and I had to change the battery on the Z7 twice, and the D5 never died. So that definitely needs improvement.
Yeah, with the button placement thing you mentioned, that's been the biggest hurdle for me in moving from the Panasonic to the Canon, because it completely operates differently with regard to menu layout, with regard to just switching between photo and video mode, with trying to change the way I focus. It's the biggest thing, and it slows you so down when you're trying to learn everything, especially if you're trying to learn it while you're doing it, as opposed to spending hours and just getting used to the camera. And even still, it's like that muscle memory. Yeah, it's like I'm sure I could pick up a Nikon, D series camera right now, and I'd be in it in 5 minutes, ready to go and shooting. But with this Canon, it's like completely different layout from the Mark II, or at least from the last time I touched a Mark II. So it's just, yeah, that's a big thing. But I think once you get past that, it's not too bad. I've been loving every bit, every minute, every time I use a different shoot. It's like, it always amazes me, especially the autofocus system and how it tracks. It's just night and day different from what I've been using. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic this evening or morning, for whatever you're in, whatever part of the world you're in right now. Snappr, SNAPPR.com, is a new sort of website that's trying to be the Uber of sort of photographers, in that basically it'll connect you with a photographer in your area. I have not used the service myself. I don't know if either of you have, but it's something we've kind of talked about and touched on in other episodes of the show, and we've seen similar concepts to this, but it's always good to kind of double check and see where the sort of market is at with regard to these type of things, because I think if you're a freelancer, especially if you're working in very highly populated metropolitan areas, this type of service definitely has more of a facility and capability for you. So you guys are kind of both in sort of metropolitan areas. Do you think you'd use something like this, some sort of thing where you kind of put yourself as the photographer, either or, but as the photographer, putting yourself out there in a service where essentially, people can just kind of bid on you and, call you up, for your services? Would either of you kind of sign up or use a service like this?
I'll let freelance go first.
Okay.
I probably have a negative take on this. So.
Yeah. I get emails from them and a bunch of other companies from time to time. There seem to be dozens of attempts for new startups that are just trying to make it. I don't know if this is a startup or not, but a lot of companies where they're trying to systemize the photography industry and make it so that it's like contactless and touchless to the point of like, I have a photographer and you have to do less work. That seems to be a common theme in our economy. Easy, make everything as easy as possible. But what is not replaceable is the relationship between the photographer and the client, at least in terms of corporate, and I guess with journalism too. And so I just don't really see it, except for like low end, fast turnaround type shoots. Like if there's let's say like a family portrait session and there's like 10 shoots coming across a photographer's desk every day, or rather there's like 10 people looking for photographers every day, I could see a market for that. But for what I do, corporate events, headshots, and photojournalism, it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also like kind of against these type of things because I keep remembering when Getty Images first came about. Like I think we were at Syracuse at the time, David. Like they were buying up giant amounts of imagery, and like now they're like this behemoth that like you just can't escape. And like anytime you're taking away individuals' expression or like a sort of a voice to the photographer, I'm just kind of against that in general.
So you're basically also, homogenizing all photographers into a glom.
Right.
Like here you go, here's rando photographer who happened to meet our standards. They're going to go take your stuff. Right. There's no personal connection, right?
Right. And like I just don't think that should be the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
So like even like getting to know your local photographer, I think would be a better, like I would prefer a bad photographer that I know, at least I've built a relationship with, to shoot my kid's birthday, if we're going to talk about those levels, than somebody that I pull through an app. I mean,
Right.
And I think that you support your artist friends that way. I feel like once it gets to that level, and sadly, this might be successful. It might be a successful venture, and I just think when these things happen, and we're really doing a disservice to each other as photographers or visual artists, by saying, "Hey, I think that you are like many other people in your career field." So, and I just don't believe that in general. I think each person brings something special to the career field or the art in general.
Do you think that can happen because the photographer isn't sort of been vetted? I mean, how, again, from the hiring side, right? When I'm looking for, when I was looking for a wedding photographer, right? I'm looking at their website. Is there a difference between looking at someone's website versus, if I'm on this service and looking through different photographers' portfolios or profiles? If I can see sort of previews of the images that they've shot, if I can see their portfolio on this service versus on their website, what's the difference?
I don't know. I feel like, because in my mind, the service is going to take a cut, right?
Sure.
Anytime you have they're going to, and also like the negotiation of that, like where they place the value. If the artist individual makes their own value assumption of like, this is what I charge and this is what it makes sense for me to make the money, right? Mm-hmm. They're assigning their own worth. Mm-hmm. And that negotiation, I think, should happen in every artist's life. I think, I grapple with it daily. And then, like, what is the piece that I make? How does that go into the world? Like, how much is that time and effort worth to me? What am I trying to say with it? And I think all of those things come into play. When you have an algorithm that says, well, this person's based in LA, so their market share or their time is worth X, but the guy in Ohio, he's worth a little less because there's more, or it's maybe vice versa, because LA is a little bit more oversaturated with photographers. They're like, oh, well, we've got thousands of photographers to pick from in LA, but there's only one guy in Ohio. Yeah. You get these like weird associative things, and whenever I see things like that, this only functions in a very monetized version of photography for me. There's nothing, we're not going to go to this site and be like, I'm going to see some great art today. Or, like we might, there might be a guy there, but like, I don't think anybody will go into that site for that particular reason. So,
yeah. Well, I was just scanning it, kind of testing out the capabilities, looking for photographers in the LA area. And sad I didn't find you, Chris, but no, just kidding. Right. But as someone who has tried to and valiantly tried and failed many times to get good photos of my family at different events and locations where I've taken them to and struggling to get them to even look at the camera, I can see the value in potentially having like a short notice photographer who can shoot a family portrait. And you do get to see like their work. Like they'll recommend people to you, but you can see their portfolio. You can see who you'd potentially be hiring and see if they're the right fit for you. So there is a degree of like choice in the matter. But I could definitely see a utility to this for my needs if the price warranted, because even at like the cheapest method or cheapest option here, I'm looking at like 1 hour, it's like $149. So it's obviously not something I'm going to do every time, but if it's like, for instance, I was at this very beautiful area with lots of great flowers and stuff, and I could see the potential of different photo opportunities. But again, I'm only with myself with my tripod, and struggling to get my kids to even look at the camera. So again, it would have to be a sort of selective choice. But I could definitely see the utility in something like this from a hiring perspective.
I like the idea of like, if you really want a photo and you don't think you're getting it, you ask your nephew or your brother or someone, you get someone else involved in photography. Anytime you give you put someone in that position that normally wouldn't take that photo, I think you're giving them the opportunity to maybe make art on their own as well. So I don't know. I feel like, again, like all those scenarios in my head break down to like there's a communal way to get to talk about photography, as opposed to outsourcing it to someone that you might not meet again.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I wonder if you
And
could.
the frustration of that tripod is half the battle of what we do as like, making imagery.
Absolutely.
And I think the bad stories are just as entertaining. Like I had a horrible wedding photographer.
Oh,
Well, they would
geez.
not at the time. It was ironic because I worked at Combat Camera and I had a bunch of friends that were wildly talented. But me and my wife had a Las Vegas wedding, and the venue would not allow any photographers into the venue. That you had to use the
Oh,
venue's photographer. And
yeah.
this is what I'm talking about with a pre-set up shot. So it wasn't the one that I would want, and then I still didn't end up having. But I think there is a thing where the bad photograph is still worth the story.
Right.
So, and I'd honestly, you know, I'd honestly fight for those bad photograph stories to keep happening
Sure. I
because
mean,
it makes you realize the worth of a good photograph.
yeah. I mean, in the end, it's just going to be part of the story of his life, as like my kid's life, because it's going to be like we'll look back on these pictures and see in every single one of these photos, you didn't look at the camera, or you made a funny face, or you were looking down, or you weren't smiling. That's your life. That's your memories right there. Way to go for not smiling when we asked you to. But Josh, you were saying these kind of companies have approached you. I believe this is a startup. I know they recently had a round of funding and they actually raised like $13 million or something. So obviously some people, see some merit in services like these. But, going back to what Chris is saying, kind of you're sort of, you weren't totally sold on it. Do you think these type of services just, they got to stop trying? Or do you think there's like a key to making this successful and they just haven't found it yet?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, my perception is that like if they're advertising, $149 for 1 hour of service, if somebody uses that app to find a photographer, they probably have never hired a photographer before. Or this is something that is foreign for them. And I think if the goal is to connect the people that are looking to hire photographers, who that are not that familiar with like how the process works, like how much, like what the industry standard for a rate is, then like I guess that's kind of a good thing. Maybe that's a good way to go about it. But for me, I find that a lot of these apps are very focused on the cost because they're trying to sell the service. They're saying like, it's X amount of dollars per hour, or you get a special discount if you do this. And like, I think when you start focusing heavily on the cost, then it's kind of like starts ruining the whole process, in that it places a higher value on the quantity and a lower value on the quality. And
Right.
I've made a career on the quality of the work that I deliver being like the most important. And so granted, everybody has a budget, and there's a dollar amount assigned to every job based on what people can afford. But if the main reason is cost, then we just become operator robots that don't care about quality. Because when photographers are underpaid, they're not going to try as hard either.
Right.
There's a company in San Francisco. I won't say the name since this is live, but there's a company in San Francisco that is kind of been trying to do that for a number of years. And they send photographers out to events, and sometimes I'm shooting an event and I hear from a client like, oh, we hired a photographer from, I'll call it X company, from this company, and they just did a terrible job. And I'm like, well, I mean, when the company is
Yeah.
advertising that they pay $20 an hour to their photographers, then like, do you really expect that you're going to get top-notch work when you're only paying? It's like you don't go to a dollar store and expect to get like a filet mignon off the shelf.
Yeah.
And
But
it
also,
doesn't one last thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that all photographers that shoot for those companies are going to be crap. It just is a matter of motivation.
Sure.
yeah, I'd say to that point, just to double down, like the photographer also doesn't have to put their name to that. They can hide behind the company, So like I
That's
think there's
true.
an ownership that each photographer or image maker should also have to adhere to as well. Like, yeah,
Yeah, no, to go to your point with you mentioned earlier about this is something for like the beginner who is just hiring someone for the first time, right? Like who may have never has hired a photographer before, and it can be a scary proposition when you're thinking about like going into that because you do have to engage with the photographer and talk to them and negotiate rates and all that stuff, and for my segment of the population who doesn't want to deal with that. And I thought to my own experience hiring like a wedding photographer, how do we hire photographers, right? Usually we go to the Google machine, we type in photographers, maybe look at photographers in a map area, and then we go through their individual websites if they have them and review their photos, and then kind of go and make our decision from there in terms of who do we want to engage with and maybe inquire with to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I think that's great if you have the time and you have the inclination. And as me as a photographer, I know what to look for and what I'm looking for in someone's photographic style. But I think for Joe Average, who the most photos they taken with their cell phone, it might be an intimidating proposition. So I think this site or this service at least does a good job in sort of, hey, these people have been vetted to a degree by this company, so you're not getting Joe college student who just made a website with his Canon T2i or whatever. So I think there's definitely a gatekeeping capability with this, but yeah, I definitely would advocate for getting to know the people who are photographing your work and doing the legwork to find out if they're a good connection for you and your family or your company or whatever you're trying to get photos for. Yeah, and to your point as well, you get what you pay for. So if you're paying the lowest rates, you may get the lowest quality there.
The other thing to keep in mind is that the photographers that are going to work for companies like that are ones who, like for me personally, I wouldn't do it because I would have to take a significant discount in what I charge to work for a company like that. I mean, typically, depending on what the rates are. And so for that reason, it's just not worth it. Like I would rather go, find my own clients and charge the rates that I think I deserve. And so if you do hire a photographer through a company like that, it's important for the client, the person who's hiring, to know that the photographer they get is someone who either is unable to find their own clients, or is maybe just starting out, or who needs that system to feed them leads. And so maybe if you just need an average to slightly above average photographer, it might be good. But again, if you're looking for like really high-end quality, then it's not the way to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump to our last topic this evening before we run out of time. We're talking about mistakes. So this was an article I saw on Petapixel where this guy had talked about some of the mistakes he had made in his career. So I thought maybe we could kind of comment on the mistakes he listed and then list any of our own that maybe we could share with our audience and who could learn from what we've done. So the 5 mistakes that this author mentions, and of course let me make sure I give them a plug. This has come... okay, now I've lost the website. I'm going to find it, but in the meantime, let me go over the 5 mistakes that he mentions. So the first one is overwork, essentially just kind of working yourself to death, constantly. If you're not working, then obviously there's something wrong, right? So, working, overwork. Shooting without intent, so just basically going and shooting anything you see and kind of shooting it, kind of spray and pray maybe, or just not going there with a proper intent with how you shoot a subject. Not chasing a niche. So again, just being the everyman who shoots everything and not being like the firefighter shooter or, the visual artist shooter. It's kind of like just finding things that you focus on. Not charging enough for your work and focusing too much on the location where you're at. So be like, oh, I'm in BFE, so I can't find anything to photograph here. I need to be in LA or San Francisco or South Korea to find something to shoot. So again, kind of that green is the grass is always greener on the other side type argument. So what do you guys think of these, initial mistakes that he mentions? Can you relate to these, or do you have any comments on these mistakes that he had mentioned?
I can relate to the work too hard part. I mean, especially in the earlier part of my career, like I feel like a big part of being a professional photographer and being an experienced photographer is knowing what not to shoot. I think that is just as important as knowing what to shoot, because if I'm at an event, or even whether it's a news event like a protest or a corporate event or something like that, like in the earlier part of my career, I made a lot of mistakes on that front, in that at a corporate event, I might have shot easily 1,500 frames in a day, whereas today I might shoot the same event and shoot more like 700 frames, because I know what the client is going to use. Or at a protest, to not shoot things that are uninteresting that I know I'm not going to use. Because it creates more work for me later if I have to go through the photos, and then more indecision anxiety of like, what am I going to use? You know what I mean? So
Right.
On that front, definitely that's something to be considered.
Yeah, shooting with intent.
I think that's the most, like, I think everybody goes through that at some point. I definitely felt that. You get tied up and you're like, well, this is the thing that's going to pay me more. And then another job opportunity will come along and present itself as you're doing the other job, So I think there's a lot of room for being overworked, or just being in your own headspace. Like, I find that nowadays, like, the things that are distracting me, sometimes you need to leave things alone just to move on to the next project. I think there's a lot to be said for knowing your own timetable, and like what you can get done in a certain amount of time. So, I think as far as mistakes go, I like that guy's list a lot. I watched that video.
Yeah, his name is Jaron
yesterday.
Schneider, FYI. Jaron Schneider.
Yeah. I thought it was really nice. And, all those videos, when people put themselves out like that, they're declarative of like saying, hey, these are things that I think will help you. I love those videos. But as far as mistakes go, I feel like I like to just think of them as the learning process. Like, you can tell someone you're going to make these mistakes. I feel like you have to make that mistake on your own to see how it affects you too. So,
yeah.
One thing I'll add to that is that although they're not fun, mistakes are important, and they are good in terms of the development of a career, because every mistake provides a learning opportunity. Not to get all like motivational poster on you, but like sometimes it takes making a grand mistake for you to learn something that you will never forget again. And again, in the earlier part of probably most people's careers, there's like a proportion where it's mostly mistakes and a few wins. And then in the later part of your career, it's kind of reversed. So, mistakes are not something to avoid. They're something to embrace.
And those mistakes are, as it tilts back, as you were saying, those mistakes become a lot more epic because, they come out of nowhere, I feel like. I feel like that learning curve, though, is so invaluable. Like, I agree wholeheartedly with you. I think that you're just going to find so many things you reflect upon each time. I don't know. I'll go there. I'll go there for the motivational. I'm here for it. I'm here for the.
I'll dial it down to like a more specific example, since we've been talking about more of the broad stuff. A mistake that I made during while shooting a fire. This was during the campfire in Paradise. I was driving about maybe 15 miles an hour, very smoky. I had some photos that I had already taken of like a burning school and a bunch of burning homes and stuff like that. I was trying to get the photos out, and so I couldn't get a good signal because AT&T kind of sucks and my Wi-Fi hotspot wasn't working well. So it was transferring at like 4K per second, which is almost not enough to get a photo out. So I had my laptop on the floor of my passenger seat of my car, and my phone sitting on the seat, and my camera sitting on the passenger seat, just so that it could keep transferring while I was driving. And out of nowhere, a downed power line was just appeared in front of me, and I had to slam on my brakes, and my cameras flew off my passenger seat, cracked my laptop screen on the floor of the passenger seat, and I hadn't transferred photos yet, rendering the laptop completely useless. And that was like an oh crap moment. Like, I'm not going to be able to file. I solved it by driving to a Best Buy and just buying a new laptop and filing from a Best Buy, which is a whole story. But the point is, since that moment, every time I shoot a fire now is when I'm not stationary, I take my laptop, I close it, and I put it in the pouch behind the passenger seat. I'll never leave it in that spot again, because that cost me, I don't know, a good three plus hours during peak action. And I'm glad that it was only that. It could have been a lot worse. But that's something that I'll never do again. That was a big learning moment because I made a mistake.
Yeah. Did you try or consider using your phone to transfer your imagery, or was that just not an option? Like
the problem was that I couldn't see anything on my laptop. It was covered in like colorful spider webs.
Right.
So I couldn't. The data was still there.
Okay.
But the monitor was ruined.
Oh, got it. Yeah, because I've been playing with the R5, and it has a neat feature where and I think they've improved a lot, where you can connect it directly to your phone via Wi-Fi. And as you're shooting, your images are automatically being transferred to your phone. And so I was just thinking, that would be a way where you don't even need the laptop. You're just directly connecting. And that might be a capability more with the mirrorless cameras, maybe with the Z series. I don't know. I've never used the Z, but, that's just a neat thing to think about with regard to, that situation specifically.
Yeah.
But
so that definitely is possible. I've transferred remotely directly from camera to the desk before, to the photo desk. The only thing that is slightly problematic is dealing with captions.
Yeah.
And granted, there is a way to make it so that you can do the captions on your phone, but it's not as efficient. The editing is you can't really edit very well. It's maybe for emergencies it could be done, but at that time I only had my D5 and D4S, and that wasn't even an option because it wasn't in there. So, and plus, for photojournalism, you just got to have a laptop with you.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I'd say my experience, this is a mistake, but ended up being kind of makes me look really well in the thing. So we were. I'm dating myself, but during the start of the first wave of the Iraqi war, we were on a ship and they were launching missiles at night, and they had a combat camera team out there that was a lot more senior to me. I think this was one of my first couple of years in the military, and they had sent us up to the bridge and they're going to launch at 2:00 in the morning. And I asked my boss if it was okay if I shot, and they were like, yeah, you can sleep in a little bit, just, be here for this time, but go shoot it. And they had some guys on a rib boat that were going to shoot it from the ocean. They were going to shoot the other ship. So we're on the carrier. There's another ship that's launching the missiles, and the rib boat's off to the left. And these guys in the rib boat had 15 years in the Navy. They were excellent shooters, and they were prepped, and they had better gear than me. They had all this stuff. I had the signal guy and my buddy that was up there, and we were shooting together. And they were like, "Well, it's gonna appear off this side. That's where it's at. It's over here." So we take the photos. And these were old cameras, but I want to say very early D iterations. So the ISO, I've got it ramped all the way up. It's going to be grainy, but I'm just trying to get something. I'm just playing around. So we take these photos, and I get one grainy shot of the missile launching, and it doesn't look great. It's not clear. It's it's in focus, but it's just super pixelated. So I get that photo, I look at it, I'm like, it's all right. They only launched the one set of missiles, so you only get one go at it. And I went to bed. I was like, nobody wants this photo. Like, I'm gonna go to bed. So I get woke up at 6 a.m. So like I've only got like maybe 3 hours of sleep at this time, and my boss is like, "Hey, you gotta go. The LT wants your image." And I was like, well, "Don't they have the combat camera guy's image?" They're like, none of them came out. So the team on the rib boat didn't get anything. So I've got the only image on my card in the camera. So I get woke up, I have to go process the image and get it out. So I think the mistake was like not thinking that this photo would be worth anything, and it became like very, very sought after at the end. And you can still look it up. It's on, I think, Dimfos or Divids, whatever. Yeah. But it's just very funny that like this is a thing that became a thing when, anybody else, and you'll see it when you look at it. It's very funny to look at now and be like, this is the thing that people want. And it ran in like multiple, like every thing that was covering the war at the time was using this image. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's how you got
that doesn't sound that bad. That's not really that bad of a mistake. It's just like, because that sounds more like a win than a mistake.
Well, it ends up being a win, but it definitely makes, like I said, it's going to make me look good. But I think it's one of those things where not knowing self-worth and not knowing that like images go places, like, and it drove home to the point to me that focus does not matter. Like things that we hear and we don't, people are always worried about like tack sharp imagery, but like really it becomes about how the image communicates. So it took me that lesson, and I always reflect back on that whenever I'm looking at a photo in a gallery or something, it might be a little soft. I'm always like, well, no, like it still does the purpose, So.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about a mistake that I made in my career, but unfortunately, I've never made a mistake. I'm just perfect and, never done anything wrong my entire life. No, I'm just kidding. Most of my mistakes kind of go with gear, and kind of the biggest thing I'll say is always pre-check your gear before you head out the door. Make sure you got your memory cards. Make sure your batteries are charged. Make sure you got all the lenses and extra things you need to get it, because there's nothing worse than heading to a shoot and not having something you need, or worse, there's no memory in the memory card, and then you're like, well, all right, there we go. I remember I was at a shoot and I didn't have a memory card, and so I think I borrowed one of the other people. It was an event, like a retirement or something, and I borrowed somebody's point-and-shoot film camera and shot it with that. I borrowed I said, you can borrow this camera and shoot this. That got back to my office, and they weren't very happy about that. Another time, I jumped over a ditch while holding a camera gear or having two camera bodies, I think, on my hand, and one of the lenses, I fell down, and one of the lenses cracked on the ground. So just making sure you know what you're doing, you're aware of your surroundings and aware of where you're going, and you have good secure hold of your gear. But going to that point you said about like not believing in yourself, that kind of points to, I think, one of the mistakes he had mentioned, which is not charging enough for your work, and I think that the root of that is not believing in yourself, or believing that you're worth the amount that perhaps other people are charging, or that you should charge. And Josh, you'd mentioned like you have a rate that is high, and sometimes people can't afford you. How do you choose your rate, and how do you know when to increase that rate? How do you know you're good enough for get more for your work?
Yeah, so the answer to that is, of course, it depends. But my style is to always get the client on the phone and to discuss with them, one, what their needs are, two, their budget, and if there's more of an urgency, then that could kind of command a slightly higher rate. Like, for example, if a company calls me up and they're like, we need this thing and we need it tomorrow morning, like this has to happen. Like, obviously they don't have a lot of options at that point. Now, granted, I'm not trying to overcharge anybody just because I can get it. But, if it's like a last minute thing and I don't really have a huge amount of time to prep, then that commands a premium. If a client is expecting more images than would be normal for the deliverables, then that might command a slightly higher premium. So there's all these different, I guess you could say, justifications for a higher rate. If if I get called from a major tech company like Google or Facebook or something, I might have a particular rate. But if I get the same call from like a family that wants something done, like a retirement party, then I'm probably not going to charge them the same thing that I would charge Google or Facebook. So it kind of depends, one, on who the company is, two, the amount of effort that you're going to have to put into the shoot, and three, how the photos are going to be used is a big part of it. If you're just doing like a family photo shoot and they're just going to put the photos on the wall, then, that's something worth considering. But if the photos are going to be for an ad agency or a major company and they're going to use them for advertising, that commands a much, much higher rate. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. But I guess more, it's in like, okay, so you charge a rate now, or you charged a rate 5-10 years ago. That rate changed over time, I presume, right? Like you're not charging the same thing you charged at the beginning of your career as you are in the current.
Correct.
So I'm just curious, how did you, maybe you answered it, but how did you increase over time? Like did you choose like a certain year and say, okay, now I'm going to double my price, or I want to make more money, so I'm going to start charging this rate now instead of, or I feel more confident my work is highly sought after, or I'm working way too much, I have way too many jobs, so I can kind of charge more. And I'm just curious where that math came in.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I'd say that my quality of work has been pretty much like about on the same level with very incremental improvements over the past 5 years. However, I have increased rates over the past 5 years. And so I would say that I kind of go with the flow of the industry. And in order to explain how that works, I would say I look for patterns in my phone calls and my negotiations with clients. So I'll give a rate range. Like if I say, for example, a particular shoot is between 1,500 and 2,500, or between 2,000 and 3,000, I'll kind of gauge how the client feels in the negotiation about a particular rate. And if it gears more toward the lower end, then I'll kind of know that like more commonly this is kind of where it's at. Or if like, let's say I quote 2,500 for a shoot and a client is like, oh yeah, that's great. Well, that to me means I'm too low. That means I could have gotten more. If they say 2,500, that's like, it's a little above our budget. Like, we'll see what we can do. Would you do 2,000? Then I know I'm kind of at the top end. Mm-hmm. And so those types of conversations help me gauge like what industry standards are. Over the course of 10, 20, 30 different negotiations over time, you kind of get a feel for like what industry rates are, especially in your area. And in the Bay Area, it may be very different than other places. But so I would say that my rate increases kind of go with the flow of the industry.
Okay, cool. The other one I just want to touch on briefly was the niche, sort of, choosing a niche. And I've never thought about that as sort of something like, again, I shoot all sorts of things. I'm primarily photojournalism, but as far as niches go, Chris, you're kind of more the visual artist. Would you say your niche is art photography when you do photography? Is it that your niche? What would you say your niche is? Or do you?
I think my work is a little more fine art, like as opposed to photojournalism these days. Right. I think to me, the work that interests me is like more of a conceptual nature. Like I think there's a lot to be said about having a niche, especially if you're trying to sell yourself. I think it goes to like all the branding. If you're trying to be a commercial photographer and work in that aspect. I interned with Kevin Zacher. I don't know if y'all know his work. He's a really great photographer down here in LA, and just one of the nicest guys ever. But he started his niche as like a snowboard photographer, and then like he's now grown into one of the top commercial photographers in LA, probably in America. He shoots for Gap and Abercrombie. Like he's just a wildly talented guy. But I think about those things. I think when you go to talking about niche and things like that, again, it goes to like how much you can sell an image. So I think it really depends on what the person taking the image is trying to do with that work. Like if you're trying to make money, then yeah, probably if you're starting out and you want to be known as a skateboarding photographer, like be like, I'm the skateboard guy. I shoot wide angle skateboard stuff. You can sell that a lot easier than being like, well, I shoot everything. So I think there's again, it goes to monetization of like how do we get our name across very quickly and say, hey, I'm going to be this type of photographer. I don't know that that's necessarily out of the things that he listed. I don't know if I agree with that one the most. Like I feel like being the photographer you want to be is more important. I'm sure like no one likes to be told what they want, what they're going to shoot and how they're going to shoot it. I think you should be excited about what you're shooting and like you should be into, I think it goes to like if you're really into shooting fires like Josh is, like, you know, there's nothing that I can say that's going to tell Josh not to shoot fires, you know? So I think there's things like that where we all make those decisions and I don't necessarily know that you need to brand yourself right out the gate. I do think words matter, though. I do think that to a certain degree, saying you take a particular type of photo or a particular type of image is important to like define the work you want to make.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about that, Josh? I mean, do you think you need to be a niche photographer to be successful, or is it okay to be a general photographer?
It's a marketing thing. So if you're like, I feel like I'm capable of doing a variety of different types of things, but if I advertise myself as photographer can do whatever you want, that's a little harder to sell than like specifically like I am a headshots photographer, I am an event photographer, I am a this is what I do, because people tend to look for photographers that are experts in the field that they need to hire them in. So I think it's a matter of marketing, one, and two, if you are legitimately looking for a niche or niche, not sure how to say that, I think the answer is to shoot whatever you're interested in. Choosing something that is most likely to generate money is not the right way to go, and choosing something that you don't really like doing because you think that's what you should do is not the right way to go. Shooting something that gets you excited about photography is the path to discover what your niche should be. And it's not necessary to have a niche, but it makes it easier to sell yourself and to market yourself.
Right. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for that insight. All right. Well, I think we're gonna end our show on that note, or that notish. I don't know how you pronounce note. Okay. We'll start with you, Josh. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Google me, Josh Edelson on Google. It's pretty easy to find my website, which is edelsonphotography.com. That's my last name. You can also go to the Getty site, gettyimages.com, and just search for my name and see some of my photojournalism. Yeah, that's a good place to start. Oh, and then Instagram too, although I'm not hugely on Instagram, a little bit. So you can check me out there too if you want.
Great. And Chris, where can people find out more about you?
I have a website as well. I desperately need to update. It's ChristopherStoltz.com. But I have work in a show called The In-Between. It's like an online, as everything is now, but the Journal of New Media Photography. If you just Google The In-Between, you can find the work there. But and I'm also on Instagram a little bit, mainly just for friends and stuff like that. But it's Stoltz_photos, so you can kind of see just what I'm looking at around the house. So, but yeah, I think you can find a couple things there.
Okay, great. Well, if you were listening to that, don't worry about having to write any of that down. You can just go to our show notes, and you'll find links to all of those great resources that our two guests mentioned. And you can find our show notes at our website, aroundthelens.com. While you're there, you can check out previous episodes of the show, as well as any articles and other videos that we produce. You can also find links to all of our social media. So if you're looking for us and like to continue the conversation, head on over to facebook.com/aroundthelens or twitter.com/aroundthelens or youtube.com/aroundthelens show. There's all kinds of their options and links. And if you'd like to support the show financially and potentially get our content early, please go to patreon.com/aroundthelens. You can throw as little as $1 a month and get all of our content early. So we would really appreciate anything you'd like to do with that. At the minimum, please tell a friend about the show. We'd really like to get more people listening and interacting with us. And if you'd like to, again, continue the conversation, please do so online. Let us know if we're right, if we're wrong, or your own stories of mistakes and anything else you'd like to share. All right, guys, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking time out to be on the show. Truly appreciate it. For Chris and Josh, I am David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 246, and we are out.
Thanks for listening to Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show. To continue the conversation, head on over to one of our social media outlets such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. To support the show financially, consider donating to us via Patreon. For show notes from this week's episode and links to everything else we talked about, just go to our website, aroundthelens.com. Finally, if you or someone you know might be a good guest for the show, get in touch with us via email at info@aroundthelens.com.